Yeah, and so this was in our proposal. Feel free to interrupt at any time if you want to ask questions. And again, what I'm trying to do is put the technology in context. So in public health, there's a difference between efficacy, which is technology performance under controlled situations. And that's the classic, we tested it in the lab. And then effectiveness, which is under uncontrolled in-use situations. And so the efficacy is what we do when we design an engineered system. We're detecting and forecasting, determining, treating, and then we have this belief that that we're going to achieve reduced exposure, in this case, to concentrations of air pollutants. But then the difference is, in a real world context, you have an outcome where it might be installed in a different environment, operated with different users, and installed by different technicians. And all of those things can, I won't say go wrong, but come out differently than you wanted them to, or than you expected them to. And there may be other things too, but those are some of the biggies, I think. And so in Sapphires, in the proposal, I kind of made up, but didn't make up, this idea, which is a comprehensive technological package. And so there's your tech that matches likely behavior of the users to achieve an effective outcome, not just efficacy, but effectiveness. But also it has to be delivered through existing provisioning systems. And so those are all the big pieces. So there's tech, there's behavior, there's existing systems. So I said I didn't make this up, and that's because it's been around for a long time in public health. And this is a guy who's written a ton about systems and intervention and so on, Gerald Midgley, a very well-known person in this field, and he defined it as purposeful action by an agent to create change in relation to reflection upon boundaries. And so there's a lot of sort of systems thinking in the health literature and the organizational behavior literature. And the term systemic intervention is most often used in literature in psychological interventions like families or gifted teens. And you hardly ever see it associated with engineering products. And so this is something that I've been trying to get my head around for a long time, that we know that products are part of a system, and yet there's not a single actor that is changing that system. And so how do we conduct an intervention in a system? So if you're somebody like Boeing, you have a really close control over your system. You train the mechanics, you have you choose your suppliers. If the suppliers fail, you chuck them out and you get new suppliers. And if the airplane crashes, you have you get really worried that you're going to be liable, so you send a team of people to understand it. And you have supply chains, and that's because your system is within your control. But when you go for public health, or engineering for public health, as John Volkins calls it, then you don't have control over all the parts of the system, and yet you're still intervening in a system. And so I've been trying to put words around this, and I'm not in love with the words I've chosen, but I've needed words to describe this. And so the notion of provisioning systems is also really important. Provisioning systems are physical and social systems that play a role in achieving resource or physical outcomes. And that could be markets, but it could also be a certain kind of workforce. It could be a government program. And I was seeking a word for this for a long time, and people would tell me, you mean markets? And I'm like, no, I don't mean markets. I mean all the stuff. And finally, Julia Steinberger is the person who translated that word in some of her work. And so So that's what I'm calling it. So some of the elements of systemic intervention in a physical system that affects health are the technology, the environment, and the user. But the technology isn't just the tech. It is the capital equipment, the thing that you buy, as well as the operation. And those are affected by not just how the technology is designed, but also how the user works with it and how the environment affects the technology. And so in sapphires, here's how I see them playing out. First of all, the system, the environment in which it's installed needs to be understood. We need to understand how it can be manipulated to prevent exposure to outdoor air in some cases if it's polluted. And so that's the understanding of the home, the building science part of this. So we're going to intervene in a system, but we need to understand that system. We need to understand that physical system. Then here comes the technology, treating the polluted air. And so that's the work that that Paul is doing and Kari is doing, sensing the need for treatment. So that's what Christian is doing, and anticipating when the treatment might be needed through the use of sensors, and then having a cost benefit function to decide when that should be turned on. And so I think a lot of engineers like really focus on this technology components, like that's the technology, right? But that technology is going to be installed in an environment and operated by a user. And so rather than divorcing the technology from the user, the work that Erica, Marilee, and Paige are doing is a lot on users. So understanding what the users will accept and prioritize, recognizing how the users are going to interact with technology, stuff we were just talking about, what kind of lights and readings, and then how do users access information about change? How do they decide to change their environment? And so all of those are necessary in order for the technology to work. So rather than thinking of our technology as a technology, I think of it as a bundle of components that can be deployed. And then, of course, another piece is the workforce. Who can identify the need for intervention? Often it isn't the user who's sitting in the home going, gosh, I just realized my air quality is really bad. Sometimes it is, but very often you need a recommendation. And then how do you install it? It might be intimidating to install it. And so who can develop the ability and the motivation to deliver and maintain that? And so thinking of all these things together is what Sapphires is about. And what I really want to emphasize here is that Sapphires is not about technology. It has technology as a tool, but those things are only tools to achieve effectiveness, to be deployed when they're appropriate. And so I don't foresee here's how the technology is going to look. Here's how it's going to act. The technology should be developed as a response to the environment, to the user, to the need for effectiveness, and to what the workforce can do. So that is all I wanted to say about how I'm thinking about the system. And then I'm happy to take questions or comments about that.
Maybe I'll just throw out a comment to break the ice if nothing else. But yeah, thanks. That was really helpful. And I think sometimes I think that like Christian's doing the really cool stuff with the technology, and so that was helpful to put it back in perspective of like, you know, why we're all, you know, coming at this from that multidisciplinary perspective.
And I don't think at all that Christian isn't doing cool stuff. But
no, agreed. I think we're all doing cool stuff just like Christian.
Well, but it's more like it's in service of the whole system.
And it's really easy to get really obsessed with the tangible pieces, right? When a project is this big, it's easy, like, hey, there's a widget I can put my hands on, at least for certain personality types. So I can certainly see where that risk exists.
What I like about it is too and we see this even like in decisions that the university makes, that they'll have developed the technology and they'll have the system piece of it works real well, but the users, then we are forced to adapt. And if we were part of the process, because we're the everyday users of that system that they're trying to streamline for us, and they actually end up making it more painful, having us in the picture actually helps. And so I like the fact that, you're looking at all the pieces together, and that it's good that you're looking at them all, that you're not going, oh gosh, now I have to think about how people are going to work it, going to use it. I like the fact that it's also looking at the sustainability of the system, because you're looking at the workforce. Because I think of that more as part of that sustainability. Like, can build great stuff, but if we can't, keep it moving in, and being able to train people, being able to service that equipment and things, then it is not a long-term fix.
One risk I see with this project, and I 100% agree with your kind of high level theme here, Tami, but I think what risk we have with this project is we don't have the timeline for a user-centric design, just because we can't iterate enough times in the project. So I think we're going to have to be really deliberate about how do we make sure it's right for the user and all of those very important things you put in there, while limited by the fact that we're not going to do 4 iterations with users. And it's, to be honest, one of my biggest fears of it, just because we're going to have a small subset of, or a small cohort of people testing these. When do we get that feedback when we know we're not going to be able to do long-term user-driven design? So I think we need to keep it in mind and figure out where our biggest bang for the buck is. We could spend 4 or 5 iterations to get it to be the right product. And where do we draw the line between productizing this and validating the approach? And I don't have answers there at all, but it is one of my concerns.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Christian. And I wondered if there's a role for testing subcomponents in here. Not that we have the time in the budget, but what you were saying about the frequency of flashing, for example, that's something you don't have to wait to get in a home to test. And so I don't have an answer to that, but I am willing to leave that open as a question that we may want to dig in that way.
Yep. I do agree. There's probably some real benefits to splitting or parallel pathing what a user is responding to and what the system is doing, right? We can have blinking lights in a mocked up box, next week, and we could iterate on those components to get the aesthetic feedback and that looks like a warning light versus that's useful, well before we actually have any of the functional elements working. That's a great idea. We also need to find people who are not, we need to find people who represent the general population maybe better than the people we often do our feedback with. What bothers me may not bother somebody else. So figuring out what that pool is that we're going to get feedback from. Start recruiting these people now.
It's too bad that Paige is only teaching sociology through May. That would be a great class to tap.
I was going to say, I'm happy to have them look at lights if you want.
I'm also concerned about how to iterate these things. Let me finish this and then I'll let you go, Allison. That I think we've sort of designed the integrative testing. I think it's pretty well designed, but that doesn't mean we can't do more leading up to it. Because I feel like there's a lot of little pieces that could go wrong or be misinterpreted. But I will say overall that Ellison and Christian and I have been involved in the household energy in developing countries for a long time. And like so much has been, oh, I have a beautiful product and the stupid users will not do. And so therefore it does basically nothing, but it's really the user's fault. And I just want us to get over that and figure out the constraints that we need to design to achieve effectiveness. Go ahead, Ellison, I think you're up.
Well, I don't know if my connection is super bad, sorry, because broke up a little, but I had two different points. One was if you've, and 70 students this semester, they're not fully representative of the general population, but like class, they might be a group of people that could be feedback. I'm afraid I froze, so I'm not sure if I can proceed. Are you able to hear me?
You sound good now. You did break up, but I think you're offering a class full of sacrificial lambs. So thank you.
Yeah, but I think the other point that I wanted to make was more to your broader themes, Tami, and thinking about interventions as being systemic. I struggle when thinking about what constraints want first. Like if the technology is developed and then it constrains the user and they must adapt spectrum, the system that saying this is the technology you must have with a similar problem or even no problem, and asking them for their feedback on how they would like to read difficult. So I'm curious, especially maybe what the communications team is thinking around what analogs do people already encounter in their environment that we could use to learn from the constraint or inform the design of the technology.
Yeah, so Ellison, I think you only break up when you're saying something serious. I think you're frozen now. Or you're frozen for me. But I think your question was about like the appropriate what comes first, and it's a very chicken egg thing. And you directed your question to the communication team, and I think you were asking about analogs for what we know already. So I'll let the communication team answer that first.
Yeah, I think we're trying to come at that from two directions. So first, if I understood what you were saying, Allison, you were saying like, sometimes we create the systems and it's unclear if they are even concerned about the thing that the system is meant to address. So we ask a series of questions, right, just about kind of where air quality kind of ranks in their universe of potential risks that they care about, to try to get at that. And then the second piece about other kind of similar systems, we've tried to think about what are kind of parallel home maintenance systems and then health behaviors to get a sense for what are like what is the kind of the willingness to engage. with systems, both for health and for home. So like we talk about kind of health protective behaviors that are sort of maintenance based, like brushing your teeth and having a primary care physician and going for preventative care. And then we also ask about, you know, furnace filters and whether or not people vent when they cook and when they take showers, that kind of thing. So we're trying to, I think, break up how people are making these decisions in a series of ways so that hopefully we can figure out, right, how people are differently motivated to use a potential system.
And I think broadly, both the tech team and the communication team are working in both specifics and generalities. And so what Christian is working on, for example, I think will be most useful if it's generally useful. Okay, I know how to anticipate air pollution, but it turns out that because people aren't looking at the light, I need to add 30 minutes, and maybe that anticipation is never going to be useful, or maybe it will be. And so if I think the more we can work in generalities, developing technology that is generally useful and that can be applied in differing environments, the better off we will be. But then I think there are some things that are very specific, like the anticipation or the filter may have to work in certain ways and will have certain constraints, or people will never do a certain thing because they're never going to prioritize air quality. And be very, very cynical there. And so I guess being general when we can and specific when we must is a goal. So that whatever we learn, we hope it can be adapted, or we hope it can be adapted, but it may end up not being able to be adapted. And we're going to find out where those sticky places are.
Yeah, a piece of what we're trying to do is also figure out if there are ways to slice up, right, the people who are responding, right? Like maybe there are types of people who act in certain ways. So like another set of our questions, and we'll go over this in more detail, but is about basically like what motivates people to engage with systems. You know, is it habit? Is it perceived like safety risk? Is it a monetary concern, that kind of thing? Because we anticipate that there are different types of people who are motivated by different types of things, right? So they're trying to also think about if there are ways that we could change how we target a potential system to different groups.
We're at time right now. So does anyone have any last thoughts? Okay, I recorded the last little bit of this, so I'll post it both if anyone needs to return to it, and then as we onboard new people. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend, and I will see you in person next week.
Okay,
you.
I just wanted you to know I'm gonna be late, so you're in person.
You're going to be late.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you walking? All right. I wish
Thanks,
you were coming, Lori.
bye.